Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Please put your hands together for Ambassador Lakshmi. Thank you. Vice Chancellor Rajkumarji, Professor, author, international affairs luminary, and as you said, the man of this evening, Professor Sreeram Chaulia ji and Sakalji. It's a great pleasure, and of course the distinguished panelists, the distinguished guests here. I congratulate Professor Chaulia, one of the foremost experts on international relations and Indian foreign and security policy, for this trail-blazing book. As you mentioned, there are many firsts that it has formed. And you know the title appropriately, Crunch Time, Narendra Modi's National Security Crisis. The book sets out to decode PM Modi's transformative leadership on India's security and foreign policy, and how he has fused his vision of India first and security first, and forged in the furnace of the many crises that he faced, he has forged India's security first vision and policy. So that's what the book seeks to do. Also, let me also say very clearly that and focus on Sreeram's dedication, which reflects the essence of the book and his message, and I quote, "To India, which is returning to its original self, Bharat." What I admire about Sreeram, and you said something about his name not reflecting or not being the inspiration for his belief in Bharat, but there must be something to it. When you are named Sreeram, he does resonate with you every day. But indeed, he is unapologetically a nationalist and applies that lens to his appraisal of Prime Minister Modi's national security and foreign policy. And it is not surprising then that it is laudatory and about PM Modi's strategies, efforts, achievements, and deservedly so. And also detects, and this is the important thing, and I'm going to raise a question after the panel, he detects in what Prime Minister Modi has done a reversion to that Bharat. You have also referred to reincarnation of Bharat. Then there is this whole issue of the strategic culture transformation, and here I would like to quote General Atta Hasnain in his perceptive foreword. He has rightly pointed out that it is a path-breaking book on the transformation of India's strategic culture under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, particularly India's fluid, tactical and strategic response repertoire in military intervention, economic action and diplomacy. The book, in my mind, has immense significance in understanding India's cultural displacement from a static and reactive state to a dynamic and proactive one in matters of foreign and security policy after 2014. The crunch time vividly charts the transformation from a very soft state, as has been mentioned, with a defensive, weak-kneed and ineffective posture and response to threats, and aggressions to one that brooks no aggression of any kind, raises its cost to the enemy, and is comfortable with its once forgotten civilizational legacy of using calibrated hard power as a tool of statecraft and military maneuvers. And then, of course, the comparisons. Of course, comparisons are never kind, but they have to be made, and they should have been made much earlier even. And as was mentioned, it helps in understanding, and that's what is also something new about this book, in understanding and getting a perspective on what happened before Modi and what happened after Modi. So, I don't think there was any Indian who did not feel abjectly defenseless and diminished when we stomached the 26/11 assault on our sovereignty, peace and security without any retaliations and lessons taught to the enemies. What would be the justification given at that time for the inaction? Sreeram calls it a watershed moment, as it damaged India's credibility as a secure and capable nation and severely denied national pride. Equally, with China, Sreeram points out how the first standoff in the Depsan Valley and the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement signed in the aftermath was a weak and partly futile attempt to reverse the damage and reduce China's aggressive tendencies. So, now by contrast, what he has charted is by looking at Prime Minister Modi's handling of the four crises from the Pathankot attack, where Pakistan drew first blood, and later I think all of them have been mentioned, both Pakistan and China. And the last one, the Ladakh crisis, came in the midst of the most calamitous, existential, biosecurity and health crisis. So this, and originating from there. So it was like double injury. So against China, he employed the credible deterrence approach, whereas against Pakistan, he adopted a punitive action doctrine, as was mentioned earlier, and both surely a shift, a paradigm shift from a military political diffidence to self-confidence. So, trial by fire. These were the Agni Parikshas that Prime Minister Modi went through, and there were a plenty during the 2014 to 2022, and they demonstrated the robustness and efficacy of a national security infrastructure, the character of its leadership, but equally importantly, the quality of security and foreign policy actions of the government, and the response of the government when faced with high threats and imperfect, what he mentions is high threats when imperfect information, short time for decision making and action, element of surprise, risk of perceived blow up into full-scale military hostilities. And Mr. Modi's assertive management, he says, has pushed any retaliation lessons taught to the enemies, whatever has put that India into a totally different league in terms of its status and standing in the world and in the neighborhood and vis-a-vis Iraq. So, when we look at the Modi mindset, and that is what I found very interesting, he talks about, he credits Prime Minister Modi, almost looking into his mind, when he was decision taking, you were talking about the Cuban crisis analogy. He credits Prime Minister Modi with robust psychological and behavioral makeup, including risk-taking, health, lucidity and intelligence, confidence, creativity, sense-making abilities, and his being a constrained challenger, you said transcender, and instead not a respecter, and resisting and outwitting the enemy, not appeasing. I think this is very important. And this, along with calibrated escalation measures and implementation to secure favorable negotiating positions in geopolitical and crisis response domains, helps India survive and thrive through these crises. So that's one very important, I think, the first, to see how these decisions have been taken. And then, when he is taking actions in the best national security interest of India, Prime Minister Modi is not overly constrained, as was mentioned, by what the international community will think of his actions. Rather, he sees or he uses all instruments of kinetic diplomacy to win over public opinion, and even use that to garner support for India's campaign against terrorism and expansionism. Dunia kya sochegi? That was not his concern. दुनिया को क्या सोचना चाहिए, सही सोचना चाहिए, उसके लिए फिर वो पूरी तरह से प्रयत्नशील है और रहे. That's the way that he has demonstrated, Sreeram has demonstrated. It's 360 diplomacy in the service of national security, without and bilateral ties, multilateral positions and multilateral regional fora. Everything is dedicated to enhancing the security interests of India. I think that again is one of the singular features of Modi's foreign and security policy. Then there is, of course, book is appreciative of Prime Minister Modi's policies and action. But what I think is of universal interest beyond those who are admirers of Prime Minister Modi is that going beyond ideological trumpeting or theoretical treatment by empirically marshalling facts and drawing upon strategic and security studies, templates, opinions, conversations from respected practitioners from related fields, including those who are known to be Modi bhakts, not known to be Modi bhakts. Those experts who have been quoted are not known to be, including some of my former colleagues, have been quoted and who write very robustly against the government, and how it stands the test of cutting across ideological frontiers, including the ones that we are so used to in this area. And then he takes up the case studies of the surgical strike in Puri, further breaking the boundaries to go into Pak territory in Balakot, remaining firm and defiant in Doklam, and turning the tables in Ladakh, all of which, unless you are politically motivated to disbelief, should remove any doubts about how India prevailed despite all the challenges and built a military, diplomatic and psychological bulwark against aggression and the psyops of our enemies within and without. Now, the characterization of Modi's actions. He has characterized them variously as his following a doctrine of offensive defense, redrawing India's response mechanisms, feistiness, plucky character, willingness to resort to unpredictable military escalation, etc. But very importantly, he emphasizes and proves that these were not indiscriminate gambles. but calculated, measured use of force to create a pattern of unpredictable, muscular behavior arising from existing military strength and political will and agility to deter adversaries and neutralize, if not defeat, their aggressive moves and thwart future attacks. His self-awareness about India's strengths and smart diplomacy epitomizes a leading power, that's Sridhar saying this, which India is surely becoming. Reforming and reinforcing military security infrastructure and the Modi effect, I will not dwell on it, but it has been covered in the book, and I know that the panel is going to look at it. I just want to focus on 2-3 other points: confronting hard-edged and touchy national security states like Pakistan, and yes, Pakistan, where the military dominance over civilian leadership is at the root cause of Pakistan's iterated warlike conduct, and also the national security party state of China. And then you're dealing with a democracy, a pluralistic democracy like India, where the opposition, instead of being in solidarity with the government, is always baying and always criticizing and denying that support, that national mobilization that is required. But mass support, and that is something very much that is covered very well in the book. Very quickly I want to cover that people are wiser than the political parties, and thanks to PM's talent as a communicator, redefinition and affirmation of Indian nationhood and deft mobilization of Indian security assets and action has won phenomenal mass support for him as a guardian of national security, as witnessed by the national outpourings, and you have referred to the Josh being high after each of these episodes. And then there is also this issue of how a secure Bharat must be there for a Nav Bharat. So there is that vision of Amrit Mahotsav, and then the 100 years, going into 100 years of India, and how that the two are enmeshed in that. And then the complementarity of national and international moves, you know, what actions he took in Article 370 and so on. So, in conclusion, what I would like to say is that it is an eminently readable book, although very scholarly, well researched and drawn, but it is also very well written, it flows well, and I would say that it brings out the fact that PM Modi is shown to be one of the best security crisis manager, but also a strong leader with an indomitable will to reinstate India to its glory and preeminence as Bharat in the world. And PM Modi has scripted and is continuing to script the history of India's rise and rejuvenation as a great power by courageously and deftly meeting serious and multiple security and other challenges, ongoing and emergent, with implications on China-Pakistan threats. I think what Meenakshi ji referred to, COVID-19 crisis, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and Russia-Ukraine war. And there might be many aspects that the panel might like to reflect on, how things have changed. And let me end by hoping that PM Modi continues to be, in Thomas Carlyle's word, this is my favorite quote, act like a thunder, storm the skies while others are waiting to be stormed. Thank you.